Action.
Mama Rachel, congratulations and thank you very much. At least you must have watched my video. You've come out and spoken to us. You have requested us to have a national prayer for the sake of this nation. I know there's so much that is happening in this country that needs divine intervention. But to all Kenyans, I want to ask you a simple question. As we immerse ourselves into prayer, into supplication and fasting, who is our common enemy? Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. Today, we are talking about something that has touched the nerve of Africa. And the story is all about Ebola. Not only about Trump, not only about Kenya, but it's about Africa. It's about African memory. Because when Africans hear reports that Kenya could be used as a quarantine location for people exposed to Ebola, many people do not hear of only a medical decision. They hear for history speaking again. And history, for sure, especially in this Africa of ours, it carries a lot of scars. Recently, discussions linked to the Trump administration have triggered outrage online reports that Americans who are exposed to Ebola could potentially be quarantined in Kenya. Instead of them being evacuated as usual to their own countries, they have to be quarantined within this country. So which means if anything was to go worse, it must happen here. You know, to them, yet them they have better facilities than us. So immediate questions come up. I was just going through the social media, and many were asking, why Kenya? Why Kenya? And Kenya is where? Kenya is in Africa. Why Africa? Why is the continent so often considered the acceptable place for danger, for risk, for crisis management? Some of us don't understand, because anytime anything happens, it's dumped in Africa. Even machines, old machines, are dumped in African oceans. So why Africa? To some people outside Africa, this question may sound emotional. But to us Africans, it's a generation experience, because we've seen it happening day in, day out, year in, year out. Because Africa has a long way been treated not as an equal partner in global systems, but often Africa has been taken as a laboratory. It's a test area, an area where you bring issues to test and find out how they are. But to understand this, and to understand why this issue creates anger among us Africa, we must first understand the history. As much as it's a solution, yes, Kenya is a hub of UN habitat now. Many UN offices are here. But as much as we want to have these people here, we must understand the history. During colonial times, if all of you can go to history books and read, during colonial times, medicine in Africa was often tied to control rather than compassion. Colonial governments, they build their health care systems, but it was mainly to protect the colonial administrators, the soldiers. The economic interests was the forefront issue when they were building those health facilities. But Africans never enjoyed these facilities. In many territories, if you go to history, you will see that Africans were subjected to harsh medical campaigns without their proper consent. Communities were being relocated, they were being isolated, even they were being forced to be injected as an experimental systems, where Africans were not even aware of what they're going through. Even after colonialism ended, unethical medical behaviors have never disappeared. One of the most controversial examples, it happened in Nigeria in 1996, where there was a disease, it's called meningitis. There was a meningitis outbreak that hit a state called, if I can remember, it was called Kano State, that killed thousands of people. And during that crisis, pharmaceutical giants, it was called who? I don't know who can remind me, it was called Pisa or PIFA, something close to that. They tested an experimental drug called Travan on children. I'm telling you, go to Nigeria and ask. Families later alleged that no proper consent was fully given. Some children reportedly died. Others allegedly suffered serious complications. And because it is in the name of testing to run to cure a disease which they had not asked the families for their consent. Years later, lawsuits and investigations followed. And the company behind that denied of wrongdoing. But the controversy became one of the most famous examples of ethical concerns surrounding medical testing in Africa. For many Africans, the lesson has been very painful. Even in moments of suffering, powerful institutions could still place experimentation before human dignity. And Nigeria was not the only example. Like, for instance, in this country, you can find that there's a specific month where flu is everywhere. On main roads, Thika Road, Mombasa Road, people in town are suffering from flu. And all of us, we go to the chemist, they prescribe azithromycin. So we wonder, does somebody wake up one fine morning, then spread a virus across, so that all of us go and buy the prescription? If you meet any people who are suffering from flu, you will realize 8 of them have been given the same prescription. So are pharmaceuticals selling their drugs? And because they're about to expire on their counters, they release a virus, everybody gets infected so that they can sell their drugs. Because we always wonder, how come it's not that just one family or one people, but it just spreads across. If you go back to South Africa, during apartheid, investigations later revealed that disturbing programs connected to biological and chemical experimentation were done. Reports linked some apartheid-era projects to unethical reproductive controls and radical and racial targeting concerns against the black population. Even some close family members who told me that, why did I take the COVID vaccine? Because they were saying that COVID vaccine has some element of reducing our performance, so no production. So if you go back to such things, to history, you realize that despite the efforts to help Africans, there are some unethical things that are never investigated. They go unanswered. Across different parts of Africa, there have been some historical vaccine controversies. One, you hear of forced sterilization allegations. You hear of treatment programs that were being carried out in an environment where poor communities lack the power to question authority. And because Africans, we love getting rich, we are capitalists. So when money is brought in, we just say yes. And we don't even ask and question, why is this investigation, why is this vaccination coming in? Recently, a few months ago or a year ago, there's a program in this country that we are talking of vaccinating all animals, all cows, all cattle in this country. So people asked, and because of methane. So I asked myself a question: who is producing more methane than the buffaloes in the forest? Why can't they go do the tests on the buffaloes than our cows in the villages? But I realized somebody somewhere was up to something. Thank you to Kenyans who really resisted, and thank you to the Minister of Health who has been very quiet. Thank you, Minister, because that never took off. So even global history, it shows us that vulnerable communities often, in most cases, become targets of risk medical behavior, and there's nobody who questions that. Like, for instance, the syphilis study in the United States. In one example, we were told that many Africans for decades, particularly the black men with the syphilis, were deliberately left out of treatment by researchers who wanted to study the progression of the disease. So imagine somebody suffering from syphilis, this treatment, but they can't give you. They want to see this disease, how it's going to eat you up, how is it going to kill you, are you going to lose your weight, are you going to lose your skin? They just watch, yet they have a solution. So treatment, imagine, those days existed only to patients who are favorable to them, but others were denied the treatment. So they want to see, how does syphilis eat you? What a pity. Such cases, they happened in America. But it reinforced a large fear shared across black communities worldwide. Because how do you leave somebody you have a solution? You know somebody, if you give him a solution of salt and sugar, he might stop diarrhea. You know you have the sugar, you have the salt, but you can't give, you have to see him diarrhea up to death. So in the fear among the black lives, sometimes treated as expendable systems for the sake of power, has angered many. So when reports emerge suggesting that African countries could host quarantine operations for dangerous diseases, many people react emotionally because the issue touches the historical trauma that Africans went through. And now, let us be clear. Quarantine itself is not evil. Public health around the world use quarantine during outbreaks. It's understood. Kenya also has medical professionals and institutions capable of handling infectious disease management. But we as critics say the issue is not simply about medicine. The issue is about inequality and power. Would the same proposal happen in reverse? For instance, if today people are working in Venezuela and the Africans working in Venezuela and there's an outbreak in Venezuela, will they suggest that these Kenyans who are working in Venezuela will be hosted in the US for quarantine purposes if they have a pandemic problem? I highly doubt. I am sure the administration will quickly look for a plane which is sealed fully and they will be exported to Africa where they've come from. Whether they live or die, those are details. Would African governments be allowed to quarantine potentially dangerous patients in Europe or America under the same conditions? That is the uncomfortable question that most people are asking. And these discussions becomes even deeper when we examine how Africa is often positioned globally. The continent, I think some historians, some religious people, critics, have always said that Jesus Christ came from Africa because Africa exports oil. Africa exports labor. Africa exports raw materials. So Africa is endowed. But when it comes to decision-making power, technology, ownership, or global influence, Africa often remains dependent on the stronger economies. This imbalance has always and will always create suspicion. Many Africans believe that the world still sees the continent as a place where difficult, a place where danger, a place where undesirable things can be relocated to. And honestly, history gives people this kind of mentality, gives people every reason to be a little bit conscious. If you go to this global media, Africa is portrayed internationally only during crisis. But when something good happens, they don't. When there is war or famine or a disease outbreak or instability, cameras arrive quickly. But when African scientists, who are very many now, innovate anything, when African doctors succeed on doing an operation, when African entrepreneurs build industries, the attention becomes smaller. The image of Africa presented to the world is so often connected to suffering instead of us showing us our strength. It reminds me of a story of some cameraman who saw a child who was about to be eaten with a vulture, and because of his profession he could not save the child. But that is what goes through in Africa, because they don't really come to us and say, now we have discovered that somebody somewhere has discovered M-Pesa. Somebody somewhere has discovered this treatment. We are never applauded. But when there is war, when there's post-election violence, when there's anything, cameras roll, how many bodies have died across the streets, but they don't want to appreciate when something good comes out of Africa. So this has been affecting our policies, our perception, and our respect for them. Now, none of this means every international partnership is evil. Okay, despite all that we have gone through, despite all that Africa has been exposed negatively, it does not mean that every international partnership is evil. Not every medical mission is an exploitation. Not every Western government is acting with bad intentions. But what we are looking for here is transparency. Transparency matters. What we're looking for here is respect. Respect matters. What we're also looking for here is equality. Equality matters. Because Africa and Africans are increasingly demanding to be treated as equal human beings in global systems, not as secondary populations whose safety can be negotiated more easily. Africans are increasingly demanding to be treated as equal human beings in global systems. They don't want to be treated as secondary populations whose safety can only be negotiated more easily. And perhaps this growing awareness has actually explained why several youths, the young people today, they have become more vocal than our generations. They are aware. Across Kenya, if you go to Kenya, if you go to Nigeria, if you go to South Africa, go to Ghana, go to Tanzania now, trying to emanate, to come up, young people are asking difficult questions. One, in their own conglomerations, they ask, who benefits from Africa's weaknesses? Why are African countries still economically dependent decades after independence? Why do global systems seem to value African resources more than African lives? These are some of the questions that I keep on bothering people's minds. And they connect directly to economics as well. Because there's no direct balance. If you look at the two, is we extract, we go out, we manufacture, we bring back and sell back to you what we had extracted from you. Because this dependency in health often mirrors dependency in the industry. That's why conversations around industrialization, self-reliance, and African ownership are becoming stronger. Even Nigerian businessman, whom I like so much, Aliko Dangote, he recently argued that powerful international interests often benefit from Africa remaining dependent. Instead of building strong local industries like oil refinery and manufacturing, they fear that dependence. They fear that if an African can come up and have their own, they will not make business. So whether one agrees fully with Dangote or not, his comments touched a sensitive point. Many Africans increasingly feel the continent is trapped in systems where others profit most from African independence. That's why this Ebola debate became more than a health story. For many people, it became symbolic of a world order where Africa is still too often treated as a place for extortion, containment, experimentation, or convenience. But luckily, God is not sleeping. A new generation is pushing back. The generations are demanding dignity. They are demanding transparency. They are demanding accountability. They are demanding that African leadership protects its citizens instead of simply managing crisis. Because ultimately, the issue is not just Ebola. Time and time again, over and over again, the so-called powerful countries do experiments with Africans. So we ask ourselves, do African lives carry equal value in global decision-making or not? Do Africans, countries, have equal power to say no? Can an African move from being used by the world to shaping his own world? That may become one of the defining political questions of this generation. Thank you so much for listening. If you enjoyed this conversation, please subscribe, share your thoughts in the comments, and let's continue asking the questions many people are afraid to ask. I rest my case.